Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Let me show you his new book for those of you that are watching on video. Yes, we are recording video and simulcasting as well. Videos are, by the way, our videos are released on Friday on my YouTube channel if you want to catch the archives and share them. The new book is called How Whole Brain Thinking Can Save the Future, Why Left Hemisphere Dominance Has Brought Humanity to the Brink of Disaster, and How We Can Think Our Way to Peace and Healing. And here's the book cover for those of you that are watching live on the video. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest, James Olson. He is an integral philosopher whose studies have included religion, art, psychology, and neuroscience. He has attended the University of Vienna, Oklahoma University, where he received a Bachelor of Business Administration, and the Kansas City Art Institute. Following the unifying guidelines of philosophy and drawing on his broad education, James Olson has made it his mission to help bring the planet's masculine, dualistic left brain and feminine, holistic right brain energy into greater harmony through his advocacy of whole brain thinking. His first book, which we talked about when it came out a couple years ago, The Whole Brain Path to Peace, earned several National Book Awards, including Forward Review's 2011 Philosophy Book of the Year. And you can find out more after the show, or you can take a peek now when you want, thewholebrainpath.com. So without further ado, let me welcome our guest to the show, James Olson. Good afternoon, James. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Nice to be here, Bernard.
It's really nice to have you back on. Thank you for joining us today. I really enjoy I do really enjoy your philosophy. I do believe that the left brain, right brain, whole brain thinking is a very important aspect for, I believe, our evolutionary growth as we grow as individuals and as a planet and as a society. We had talked a little bit before the show about the old book versus the new book. What was the motivation to write this second book?
I learned quite a bit after writing the first book. I got feedback, and then I discovered some new information, some new sources of information, and I came up with some new ideas that made it imperative that I update the old book.
Oh, okay, great. So it's kind of a comprehensive, fuller version, for lack of a better term.
Yes, it is.
Wonderful, wonderful. So for those of us that don't quite understand the difference of what we're talking about here, left brain thinking versus right brain thinking, for me, it is a part of my metaphysical studies and my metaphysical practices to try to bring the catalytic, assertive with the holistic, intuitive into balance. Can you explain a little bit to our listeners and our viewers the dynamic or maybe the characteristics of the left brain and right brain? Many people may not know that they work differently. Can you share a little bit fuller picture on that?
Well, the right hemisphere, the right brain, shows us the big picture. It sees the unity of reality. It takes all of our information as a whole and presents it to the mind. The left hemisphere allows us to focus in on individual aspects of our reality, individual aspects that we might see and want to learn more about. So one sees the big picture, and one allows us to go in and get the details that we need in order to make the big picture more accurate, or to actually make it accurate, because without it, without the insights of the left brain, we have this kind of big picture view, but lots of the details are missing, and we can misunderstand things more easily if we don't have the insights of the left hemisphere.
I see. I see. Thank you for that. Is it fair to say that, I guess we're talking more metaphysically here, is that the right brain is, wait, I'm going to get confused here. The right brain is the holistic, the left brain is the linear logical. Is that right?
That's correct. I sometimes refer to it as dualistic. When you think of dualistic, you're thinking of two parts, and that's what the left brain does. It starts breaking down the whole, and it starts with two parts. And another way of thinking about the dualistic side is, you mentioned linear. Another word that comes to mind is continuum. The the left brain spreads the details out on a kind of a continuum, and allows us to see see relationships in that sense, and to discern between details. So I refer to it as a dualistic sometimes. Now most people have their right brain is holistic and the left brain is dualistic. There are a few people, and we don't know how many, but there are a few people in which this is reversed. So if for any reason you seem to think that your left brain shows you the big picture, and the right brain shows you the details, that is possible. But so that's why I often use the terms dualistic and holistic rather than right brain and left brain.
Oh, very good. And actually, that kind of sounds more metaphysical to me. I can grasp that easier, actually. Um, as far as how it functions in our body, I mean, I've heard that the left brain takes care of the right side of the body and the right side takes care of the left side of the body. Is that true, or is that a speculation, or?
No, that's true, and that brings up an important point that I've discovered since the previous book, that what is going on is each hemisphere has its own operating system, its own management system that is capable of managing both hemispheres. Now, sometimes people think that one side does one thing and one side does another. And in most cases, both sides are at work all the time helping us to understand our reality. But one management system or the other can be in charge of the two sides of the brain. And that's where the big difference comes in between left brain thinking and right brain thinking. It's that the left brain is in charge of or the right brain is in charge. And that's really what separates us and creates the polarization that we experience politically, sexually, and otherwise.
Wow, very, very interesting. There was it reminds me of a book I read, geez, back, and I might have mentioned this last time you were on the show. It was a book called Access to Inner Worlds, and it was a study of a gentleman who was having, I forgot if it was some kind of medical condition, and they ended up severing the left brain and the right brain. And he would, things that happened to him were like, he would want to grab something to eat, but his left arm wouldn't let him have it, and they kind of like fought with each other. It was a very interesting study. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, Access to Inner Worlds, by Colin something. I forgot his name, though. But is that, I mean, I bring that up because it kind of reminds me of the inner struggle that we have sometimes, how our holistic self might be struggling with our logical self, and stuff like that. So is that kind of fair? We kind of have to. It affects the way we make our decisions. In other words.
Yes, we. The way I like to think of it, our consciousness uh, tends to reside in the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere, and again, that's for most of us. Um, and so we look at reality from the left brain view or the right brain view, and we tend to fail to see the other view. Now, both sides are always providing information to consciousness, but there's something called complete dominance. Actually, there are three kinds of dominance that science has found. There's complete dominance, and that's the case where either the right brain or the left brain is in charge of the two hemispheres. There's another type of dominance, and that's incomplete dominance. And that's that in that situation, both hemispheres are working together to a certain degree, but one may be much more dominant than the other, but there's still a good connection between the two hemispheres. And there's a third type of dominance, and it's called co-dominance. And in that case, both sides of the brain are working as a team in harmony. Now, codominance is fairly rare, and so is incomplete dominance. And we don't really have numbers on that, but and let me explain that in terms of flower breeding, which is a good way of really understanding what's going on, because this pattern works throughout science. If you cross a red flower and a white flower, if genetic complete dominance is in effect, you're going to get white offspring or red offspring, or a combination of some red offspring and some white offspring.
Okay.
If genetic incomplete dominance is in effect, you're going to get pink flowers, and that there may be various shades of pink, but they're going to be pink. They're going to be a combination of red and white. And the third type of dominance, codominance, if that's in effect when in the offspring of these two red and white flowers, you're going to get flowers that are partly red and partly white. So that's how genetic dominance works. And that's a discovery that I've made since the first book, and that has really opened up my understanding of what is going on in the two hemispheres of the brain, because we inherit one of these three types of dominance is going to be inherited. So we're going to inherit complete dominance, in which the right or the left brain is in charge. Incomplete dominance, in which basically it's a hybrid of the two hemispheres, of the two operating systems. Or we're going to have codominance, in which both hemispheres are at work. And when both hemispheres are at work, then we essentially have two persona in our head, and the male side of the brain is naturally attracted to its complement, so it's attracted to females. And so the female side of our brain is fully aware and fully seeking its complement, so the female side is seeking males, so that produces bisexuals.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, you had a very interesting hypothesis on sexuality and gender identity uh, in this particular matter. But and I want to get into that a little bit later. But what I'd like to ask you is why is it so important for us to understand the characteristics of our left and right brain, and how does this how does this affect our lives and the way that we see ourselves and the way our society operates?
Well, when genetic complete dominance is in effect, and that's for most of us, we know that, and most people have this, that means that either the right brain or the left brain is in charge. So we have a society that's largely divided between people with two radically different perspectives. And I guess I need to emphasize that the two sides are complements. They're specialists. And by complements, that means that what one does, the other one doesn't do, and vice versa. So if you have the male perspective only, you're pretty much totally missing the female perspective, except that of course we get that from our mothers and from our sisters and in our significant others. So we always have an input of both the feminine and the masculine to a certain degree. But if the masculine is dominant, and especially if you live in a very masculine dominant society, such as the Middle East, where women are really shut out in a really profound way,
Mm-hmm.
then you have this internal voice that's giving you the masculine left brain perspective, and your culture is basically reinforcing this masculine perspective, and so you largely miss the feminine perspective, and so this creates two really different kinds of people, uh, depending upon which side is informing us. And there's a profound conflict between the two, because since they're so different, they really uh, not only fail to understand one another many times, but they just see things in a different way, and they respond differently, and you may or may not understand the opposite response.
Right.
So it can be very confusing.
Absolutely. And then we're also having, well, there's a lack of balance as far as I'm concerned. um, so, how does brain dominance and its perspective affect our sense of peace? I would think a holistic peace.
The the left brain, the masculine brain, is the side that takes care of us. It's our security brain. It's in charge of the individual. Seeing I said it sees the details, and one of the details of reality are the various individuals. So it's all harmonious. The left side is harmonious in its own in right, that in that it sees the details, and the details of the individuals. So it's focused on the individuals and cares about what's good for the individual. And the right side, which is the feminine side, and it's also the liberal side, because the right side cares about the collective needs. It sees the big picture. It sees all the individuals as a whole. Uh, and so the right side is wanting to take care of the collective needs, and the left side is wanting to take care of the individual needs. And that sets up an existential conflict between the two ways of viewing reality. Did I answer that question, all that you wanted to know there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, you've brought up some great awareness to me how wonderful it would be if everyone was educated on this, so we wouldn't take this left, right, liberal, conservative paradigm so seriously. I feel that perhaps if we all really understood where I guess, our consciousness lies, or what dominant side of our brain lies, that would answer a lot of questions as to why does Trump act one way, why does Bernie Sanders act another way? It kind of clarifies things where we don't have to take it so personally and see it as a function of our brain dynamic, I guess, for lack of a better term. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I like uh, to picture this in terms of consciousness. We're all consciousness. We have this awareness, and the brain is sending us two signals, or not. Um, it's the left brain is dumping information into consciousness, and the right brain is dumping information into consciousness, and we can choose to ignore one if we so, especially if we've been educated to ignore, say, the feminine side. If we're masculine, and most of our information coming to mind is coming from the masculine side if we have genetic teeth dominance. And so the only information about the right side is coming from culture. But if we don't trust culture, and if we don't understand the holistic side, we're unlikely to trust it, because we tend not to trust what we don't understand, and we tend to fear what we don't understand. So especially since the left brain is energized by fear, whereas the right brain is energized by love, if we're in the fear, if our dominance is left brain dualistic, and that in our consciousness is primarily fed by the left brain, we tend to be fearful anyway, and we we're just reluctant to understand and to accept what the liberal holistic right brain is trying to tell us, and what the people in that group are trying to tell us.
I love it. That's my new answer. I'm not a liberal. I'm a right brain thinker. um, with that being said, I was just thinking how, in a lot of spiritual work, a lot of metaphysical work, and consciousness work, there's a lot of talk about, well, our ego versus our spirit, and love and fear, just the two things that you talked about. Um, if we were to look at things psychologically and or Eastern philosophically, I should say, is the ego left brain or right brain, or is it a combination of both?
It's, to the best of my knowledge, it's definitely left brain. Uh, if you read Tola's books, The Power of Now, and I forget the title of his second book, he talks a lot about the ego, especially in the second, in his the follow up to The Power of Now. And when you look at what he says about the left hemisphere, or what he says about the ego, and you look at my chart, the chart in my book about the characteristics of the left hemisphere, all of the things that he says about the ego are the same things that I'm saying about the qualities of the left hemisphere.
I'm looking at the chart now. Let me just share a little bit about what you're talking about. In the book, James shares, I'm guessing this is the one that we're talking about: perspectives, operating system inputs, dualistic conscious left hemisphere, linear, directional, polarized picture, focuses on small element, limited by focus of the part, focuses on elements, reveals text, focuses on what we know, non-living things, interiors of holons. What are holons?
Holons are is another word of explaining uh, something that otherwise is kind of confusing. Everything has a whole, has a is a both a part and a whole. The only exceptions might be if there's a smallest part, or a small, or a largest part. Otherwise, everything in between is partially whole and partially um, apart. And so a holon is a word that was coined uh, by Arthur Kessler, if not before, to explain this aspect. Because if you start talking about parts, uh, what I see as a part, you might, if depending on your perspective, you might think of it as a whole, or what I think of as a whole, you might think of as a part. For example, this planet is, you might think of that as a whole, But if you're looking at the solar system or the universe, it's only a part. So everything in that sense is a holon.
Ah, okay. I see. I get that now. Very
And
good.
so, and so looking at the chart, the main thing down at the bottom of the chart, the individual self, that's a characteristic of the ego, that it focuses on the individual self. And the ego and material values is another uh, characteristic of dualistic consciousness. And the ego is very materialistic. And another characteristic is personal needs and security. And these are egoic
Yeah.
characteristics.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I can't help but think of what our society would be like if we could be balanced in, in both of the hemispheres. Well, like you said, the whole brain path to peace. Anyway, we have a commercial break. We'll be back in just a moment with James Olson.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show live here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are the #1 listener-supported radio station, so by all means, please take a moment and make a donation at freedomslips.com. And if you happen to make a donation, please put a little note that says you were listening to the Just Bernard Show. We've got hours and hours of programming on the station, and it's thanks to your support. Before the break, I was just looking. They were saying they're having some mic issues. I hope we took care of that. I know the radio station sounds fine, but the video might have been a little off. But anyway, let me welcome James Olson back to the show. And James, we were talking about the ego might be, well, we're talking about how left brain has more of the egoic characteristics. Is this kind of what people talk about when we're talking about our shadow self, the opposite of where we're dominant? Or, is left brain dominance making the right brain the shadow self? I guess this is more of a metaphysical question.
I think the left brain is where we get our shadow self. That's where it comes into consciousness. The two sides are I mentioned they're complements. That means from a left brain view, they're actually opposites. So the left brain is energized by fear. The right brain is energized by love, and that those are really the two extremes on the continuum of the whole that we are. And so the left brain seems like is the perfect place for the shadow side to come in.
Absolutely, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Thank you for that clarity. So moving past the dualistic behaviors of our left brain and right brain, is there anything that we can do to create more balance? Do like Eastern practices like meditation help us create more balance? Or I'm wondering if there's anything we can do to try to have a more holistic, what could we do to think more whole brain, I guess is the question.
Okay, well, you mentioned meditation, and meditation brings us into our right hemisphere, but it doesn't necessarily keep us there. We can't be in meditation all the time. My recommendation is to understand what both sides of the brain are trying to tell us, understand both perspectives, understand both responses. Once you understand both sides, as a creator, let me say this: as a creator, our first and most important creation is to reconcile what the two sides of the brain are trying to tell us. That underlies all other creation, because all creation is a basis of what we think through the brain. And so if we can understand the right brain, for example, and that's a side we tend not to understand because our society is so left brain dominant, and our learning institutions are left brain dominant and teach us left brain ways of perceiving and responding to issues. We overlook we're not being educated in the right brain ways of perception and solving problems. So what we really need to understand is the right brain and understand the choices that the right brain are giving us. And once we understand our choices, when they come to mind, we're no longer afraid of what the right brain is trying to tell us, for example. And we better understand why it is telling us what it is telling us. We understand its background. And well, it's as if you hired two advisors. You're going into a new business or something that you know nothing about, but it's really important that you do this. So you hire two advisors, and these two advisors are as different as they can be. Each one is a specialist in one aspect of the new enterprise, and the other one is a specialist in the other aspect of the enterprise. Well, if you don't understand one of them, if you don't understand his or her language, if you don't understand what they're trying to tell you, it's going to be hard to implement their recommendations and their insights. So you need to have an understanding of both of these advisors. And that's really the situation we are with the brain, because the two sides of the brain are advising us, and it's our creative, our most profound creative act is to integrate the two sides of the brain, integrate the information that the two sides of the brain are sending us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I got the picture when you said the two advisors. I like that. It's a great analogy. And speaking, what you talk about in your book, you talk about the impact of brain dominance when it comes to religion. Now, someone like myself that studies pagan religion and matrifocal versus patriarchal, historically we saw the shift go from matrifocal to very patriarchal in terms of religious experience and perspective. How does the brain dominance impact our religious belief?
Well, the heads of most religious institutions are male, so they naturally see things and respond in ways that are based on the dualistic left brain, the fear-based brain. And the left brain is also competitive. And that's why we know that men are very competitive. And so what we have is a situation in which religion tends to be competitive and fearful that some other religion is going to take over and dominate us. And so the world religions are basically masculine-based religions, left brain-based religions, and the left brain is the brain of the individual, and the right brain is the brain of the big picture, which is basically the God brain. God sees the big picture and is inclusive. And so basically we have men trying to run religion and excluding women. And what we should have is women in charge of religion, because the right brain is the side that cares about the collective, and it's the love side. It's so religion is the organization of religion is just as I'm reluctant to say it, but is wrong. It's just starts out on the wrong premise. It has the wrong people directing it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with you. I agree. I find that, we always talk about, actually I was speaking with my friend about it last night, putting the Christ back into Christian, they forgot the collective, they forgot the nurturing, they forgot the supporting. It's become very exclusive. And we have a friend of ours, Laura Eisenhower, comes on the show, and she talks about how bringing the goddess consciousness back into our way of thinking or into our spiritual is what's really going to, well, to save humanity, for lack of a better term, to see that nurturing mother goddess as well as the, the protective, God aspect, masculine aspect, the divine feminine and the divine masculine, which was what cut out, what, about 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. We lost that whole view. So I definitely, I can see what you're saying, definitely there. Um, do you have any thoughts on the whole idea of bringing back the divine feminine aspect, and is that helpful to us in a spiritual way, in this way?
Well, we need to understand it. Men don't understand women. They don't understand their own right brain. They don't understand the views of the female right brain, and they fear what they don't understand. And so I know for a fact that men tend to want to keep women from being in control because they're afraid that women will respond the way they have by excluding men. And that's just not necessarily the case. Certainly, I hope it would not turn out that way, because the right brain is inclusive, and the right brain actually has a connection to the left brain. It gathers the details that makes up its big picture from the left brain. The left brain, on the other hand, is an entity to itself, and it does not draw information from the right brain. And so that's why men really don't have a way of understanding women, except that women are able to get through to them. And with our learning institutions set up the way they are, that's difficult. So we really need to understand the right brain. And that's really the purpose of my book. I originally set out to explain the right brain to men so that they could better understand women, and also better understand their own right brain, and help bring better balance and help bring peace to our world.
I love it. That's wonderful. Well, thank you for your effort in doing that. I think that's an important part of our society to understand both aspects of life. And, well, for me, it's energetic properties of ourselves and our society. You have a very, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, and I wanted to be able to get into this before the show is over. Um, you, you hypothesize that homosexuality is a result of a reversal in brain dominance. Can you explain what you mean by that? Because I find that I can actually relate to that.
Well, the standard pattern, well, first of all, so either hemisphere can dominate either a male or female body. The standard pattern is for the left brain masculine perspective and response to be found in a male body, and the feminine in the feminine body. But sometimes this is reversed. And so in that case, a male body is guided by the right brain feminine perspective, or or feminine body is guided by the masculine perspective. So that's what I mean by reversal. It's a reversal of the dominant pattern, which is male, and in a male perspective in a male body.
Right, right. Um, so, what does that mean to those who believe that hormonal or environmental factors have a role in determining our sexual orientation?
Well, I think hormonal and environmental factors, in fact, evidence supports the idea that hormonal factors set up the brain when we're very young. And so what I'm saying is that what it sets up is the brain's operating system. So I think it's all of these ideas it's not one or the other. I think it's all of them. That the environment contributes to the hormonal factor, and the hormonal factor determines the brain operating system, and the brain operating system determines our sexual orientation.
That's very, very interesting. And I'm sitting here reading some of these notes that you have, and I can't help but wonder, does this, would it be fair that this overlaps into transgenderism or gender identity? Because it's very interesting. As someone who's involved in a very diverse gay community here in Roanoke, I know transgender, let's say a transgender woman who is still, well, as a woman would be considered heterosexual. So it gets a little overlappy there for me. What are your thoughts on gender identity when it comes to the left and right brain?
Well, there is overlapping. Um, the operating systems, the characteristics of the operating systems, are the characteristics that we associate with gender. So the what I call the feminine side is the feminine side because it is gentle, it is peace loving, it shares, it wants to serve, and so these are the characteristics of the right hemisphere, and these are characteristics that we associate with gender. And so, we just talked about what happens when the sides are reversed. Another factor to bring in here is that there's a great deal of variation in how left brain or how right brain we are. We're not just right brain or left brain. We can be very right brain or very left brain, or we can just be barely right brain or barely left brain. And so my hypothesis is that if you're a male and you're just barely right brain, that you may not really recognize that, or you may only recognize it because you're attracted to other men. But if this is very strong, if you're at the extremes in terms of dominance, then the conflict between your body and what your mind is telling you is so strong that it sets up turmoil, and it makes you want to change. You want to reconcile this radical difference between your say your male body and your mind, which is extremely feminine. And so in that case, there's a tendency to want to change your body to match your mind, because you can't really change your mind to match your body. I mean, you can a little bit, but we're basically, genetic dominance sets the brain's operating system, and we can't change that. But we can change the body to match the mind, and so that's what happens to transgenders.
That's wonderful. That's a great hypothesis, actually, and I appreciate that you see this as something that is, well, I guess inherent within our operating system, and how, like you said, you can't change the mind, but you can change the body. We hear a lot about, a great example is those, what do they call that? Pray away the gay, or, the ones where they send you to, like, psychologists to try to make you straight or whatnot. So it's not necessarily environmental. It comes, well, as Lady Gaga says, you're born this way, for lack of a better term.
Yes, and when I said environmental, that's in the very first stages of life, when we have no control over what's going on. So the environment can release, can determine the hormonal composition of the embryo and the mother, and that's the only place where the environment has an effect. I don't think that we can that anyone can change their sexuality. I think it's fixed by genetics.
That makes sense. I agree. Speaking of, to move on to our society, I guess, for lack of a better term, you were saying how we can look at the left brain characteristics and brain characteristics as complementary to each other. How can we apply that to our society and our culture in order to live more peacefully with one another?
Well, if we understand that they're complementary, then that gives us a matrix in which to plug in our various ideas. It says that the right brain and the left brain are a harmonious team if we only understand how to manage them. So um, that says that there's a way to resolve the conflicts between the two sides of the brain and the two sides of culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like, I guess, for lack of a better term, saying that we have, well, it's like having two parents. You have the father aspect, you have the mother aspect, and if we can look at society's characteristics in that way, we don't necessarily have to pick one or the other. And I can't help but notice, like for myself, I consider myself very socially liberal, and I do believe that we need to take care of one another, we need to accept one another. But, on specific issues, I might be a little bit more conservative. And I know many conservative people, quote unquote, politically, that are socially liberal. So, again, there's that kind of that give and take and a blurring of the lines, that gray area, which to me is actually non-dualistic.
That's where free will comes into to play. If we're left brain, we don't have the the information coming to mind primarily may be left brain, but we can always reach out and try to uh, learn about the right brain, the complementary side of the brain, and bring that into our thinking. So, and we'll always, and just because we have even if we are strongly left brain, we don't have to make left brain based decisions. Uh, we have this whole world of choices, and sometimes even if we're left brain, we can recognize the value of love and the value of cooperation and the value of peace, and all of these are right brain qualities, but they're very logical, even to the left brain. The left brain is not unintelligent, and it can be it can be brought over. It can understand the value of the right brain. It's just a matter of education.
I agree. I agree. And we're out of time, and I think that's a great spot to end on. Let me just share your book again. It's called How Whole Brain Thinking Can Save the Future: Why Left Hemisphere Dominance Has Brought Humanity to the Brink of Disaster, and How We Can Think Our Way to Peace and Healing. James, where can people find your new book?
Well, they can certainly find it on Amazon.com or any of the other big resellers. You can find it, and I hope you'll try to ask your small bookseller. You can go to my website. You can find information.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. And I'll put all that information in the description of the archive. Thank you again for joining us today, James. And everyone, we love you. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.